Is it worth achieving all your goals if along the way you lose the people who you truly care about you? Hey guys, what about you today? I am Luana, and today we're going to talk about one of the most complex characters in Shira and the Princesses of Power. This video might feel a little different from the usual content I bring to the channel, but the truth is that this series and especially this character are topics I genuinely enjoy analyzing. Even though the show has left Netflix and the hype has decreased over the years, it's still a story that remains relevant when we look deeper at its characters, especially when it comes to Catra. Because her journey isn't just about war of or rivalry, it's about ambition, trauma, the need of validation, and the consequences of the choices she makes while trying to prove her worth. So, throughout this video, we're going to analyze Catra's trajectory from her childhood in the world through and through her rupture with Adora all the way to her downfall and eventual redemption. And more than that, we'll try to understand how her decisions demonstrate exactly what happens when someone tries to grow and achieve their goals, but ends up pushing away the people who matter most. But before diving deeper into the analysis, we first need to understand the world where these stories take place. To understand who Catra became, we need to look directly at the environment where she grew up. Catra and Adora were raised inside the Horde, a military organization that trained children to become soldiers. This means that from a very young age, they lived in a system based on performance, discipline, and hierarchy. One important thing to notice is how this dynamic appears in specific scenes throughout the series. In several flashbacks, Shadow Weaver clearly treats Adora as the child with greater potential. She reinforces the idea that Adora has stronger abilities and deserves more investment. Meanwhile, Catra often receives criticism or positioned as the negative example when compared directly. This constant comparison isn't subtle, it's verbalized. The difference in treatment is visible to both of them, and it creates a very strong psychological impact on Catra. When a child grows up being constantly compared to someone who receives more recognition, they begin to internalize the idea that they have to compete in order to exist in that space. More than competing for power of position, Catra starts competing for validation, and that directly shapes her behavior in the episodes that follow. Beyond constant comparison, Catra's childhood was marked by a clear pattern of emotional abuse and manipulation within the Horde. Shadow Weaver wasn't just a strict trainer, she used psychological control as a method of authority, and this appears in a specific sense throughout the series. In multiple flashbacks, Shadow Weaver consistently reinforces the idea that Adora has greater potential and deserves more attention. Catra, on the other hand, is often ignored or placed in a lower position. This kind of dynamic creates an environment where mistakes aren't treated as part of learning. They are treated as proof of incompetence. For a child, that leaves a deep impact because the message that sticks isn't just you made a mistake, it's you are not enough. Shadow Weaver also used comparison as a manipulation tool. When Catra realizes she constantly pushed it aside, it doesn't only create a rivalry, it creates resentment and insecurity. She begins competing not just for rank, but for attention and validation. On top of that, the Horde's entire structure it reinforces a rigid hierarchy and pushment-based discipline. In other words, the system itself strengthens power-based relationships and control. This explains why later in the series, Catra reacts defensively, aggressively, or even self-sabotaging in situations where she feels like she's losing control. These behaviors don't appear out of nowhere. They are directly responses to environment that shaped her. All of this that Catra experiences, constant comparison, favoritism, manipulation, and the feeling of never being enough, creates a psychological pattern that determines her future decisions. When Adora chooses to leave the Horde, that moment isn't just betrayal for Catherine, her and her promise. It's the point where all those childhood insecurities resurface. She feels left behind by the only person who had ever been close to her. That sense of abandonment activates every previous round. Insecurity, fear of inadequacy, and the need to prove her worth. And from this point forward, her story changed completely. Up until now, her childhood and abuse shaped who she was internally. Now, those internal scars being to dictate her external actions is the beginning of her transformation from a negligent child to a powerful antagonist obsessed with proving she doesn't need anyone. After everything that was built during their childhood inside the Horde, there comes a moment that completely changed the dynamic between Catra and Adora. During a mission, Adora discovers the ancient sword that later reveals her destiny as Shira. It's not exactly in a mission, but let's say like that. And then when she learns the truth about the Horde and what is really happening to Etheria, she makes a decision. She chooses to leave the Horde. For Dora, this choice is based on moral conviction, because in for us, maybe it is true, but she understands that the side she was fighting for is not protecting the planet, it's conquering it. So leaving the Horde means choosing to do what she believes is right. But the way this decision is received by Catcher, it's completely different. From Catcher's perspective, this isn't about right or wrong. It's abandonment. It confirms everything she had always feared. Sorry. That in the end she wouldn't be a priority. That when someone had to choose, they would choose something or someone else over her. And this moment is extremely important in shaping her character, not only because it breaks their friendship, but because it transforms their relationship into direct rivalry. From that point on, Catra's motivation changes. She is no longer just trying to survive inside the Horde. She's trying to prove that Adora's choice was a mistake. She wants to show that she can rise, get power, and become indispensable. Because if she becomes strong enough, Maybe that proves she was never meant to be left behind. That broke off the promise they made in a childhood to her means more than Adora will ever know, because the abuse, the torture, the favoritism, and all this stuff. There's a fundamental detail in this separation scene that completely changes how we interpret it. When Adora says, "Come with me," sounds simple, but it carries a very different meaning compared to something like, "Stay with me." "Come with me" comes from a decision that has already been made. She has already chosen to leave the Horde, which means to Catra she left her behind. The main choice is no longer open for discussion. The invitation is about following the path. Meanwhile, "Stay with me" would imply that the decision is still being built together, that the priority at that moment will be preserving the connection before choosing sides. This difference might seem subtle, but in a relationship built around trauma and fear of abandonment, it carries weight. From Ketra's perspective, who has always felt like second priority, the way the decision was communicated reinforces the belief that she wasn't fully included in the choice. And that helps explain why she interprets the moment as abandonment, even if Dora's intention was totally different. That small difference in perspective turns a strategic separation into an emotional rupture. And after Adora lives in the Horde, Catra's attitude changes completely. She doesn't just react with hurt or withdrawal, she reacts by trying to climb the system that always put her in second place. With Adora gone, space opens up in the military hierarchy, and Catra starts taking on more responsibilities and leadership positions. She makes quick decisions, uses tactical intelligence, and begins gaining recognition within the organization. So externally, she is growing in power, but internally, her motivation for that growth is not just military ambition, it's the need to prove her worth. Each promotion or achievement isn't just progress, it's proof that she can surpass the person who was always considered above her. There's another important effect in this rise. The more power she gains, the more isolated she becomes, because her leadership style starts to rely on control and distrust. She distances allies, reacts defensively to criticism, and struggles to build trust-based relationships. This happens because deep down, the fear of being betrayed or abandonment again influences every decision. So Catra's rise within the Horde works almost as contrast. Outwardly, she appears stronger than ever, but inside, her insecurities remain intact. And this tension between power and fragility becomes even more evident in the upcoming events. One of the most crucial moments in Catra's journey is when she decides to activate the dimensional portal. This decision happens under extreme pressure. She's competing for power within the Horde, facing direct conflict with Adora, and trying to maintain control over an increasingly unstable situation. Even knowing the portal could have impracticable consequences, even destroying part of the planet or who knows all of the planet, she chose to go ahead. And this reveals something very important about her mental state at that point in the story. For Catra, losing is not an option because losing would confirm everything she's been trying to deny. That she can surpass Adora, that she can maintain control, and that maybe her decisions are always wrong. The portal stops being just a military strategy. It becomes a desperate attempt to guarantee victory at any cost. But the problem is that any cost ends up being extremely high. When the portal gets out of control and starts causing chaos, the consequences directly affect everyone involved. And at this point, something crucial happens. Catra realizes that she's lost control. She realizes that her own choices have caused real harm. This realization changes the emotional weight of the character. Until then, many of her decisions could be justified as reaction or defense. After the portal, there is a tangible, irreversible result of her actions. This event marks the lowest point in her antagonistic phase. Not just because of the destruction itself, but because it clearly shows that the desire for absolute control produces the exactly opposite, and from this moment on, there is no going back to the previous phrase of the character. And this part of the story is totally proved by one scene when Adora and Catra are side by side, head to head, and they are talking about everything that happens. And Catra says that she brought us see the whole world and fall into a destruction, a completely destruction. Then let Adora win, or to admit that Adora was right all the time. And after the portal disaster, Catra finally feels the weight of everything she's done. She is no longer in control, and all of we know that since season 1. Every step she takes echoes the mistakes she made, and this is when the Horde Prime enters its scene. Being captured is not just a physical defeat, it's an emotional, psychological defeat. And she realizes that decisions which once seemed justifiable or strategic now have real consequences. There's no more rationalizing, no more winning through power. And this moment is brutal because Catra, who always needed to be strong, realizes she cannot protect or control anything alone. Every relationship she destroyed with Adora, with her lies, with her own team, weighs on her. Every relationship she destroyed weighs on her. And in this situation, her vulnerability becomes visible, and she's alone, surrounded by enemies, confronted not just by external forces, but by all the wrong choices she made. This is when pride and obsession collide with guilt and fear. And it's exactly this that sets the stage for the next phase: isolation, deep reflection, and eventually the path to redemption. After the capture and the consequences of the portal, Catra enters an even deeper phase of isolation. She had already been distanced herself from others during her rise to power in a first in the season 4, for example. But now this isolation is no longer a strategic choice. It becomes unavoidable because she starts to realize that many of the relationships she broke cannot simply be rebuilt as if nothing happens. Trust was shattered, friendships were damaged, and her connection with Dora, which was always central to her story, is now severely fragile. This period shows an interesting contrast. On the outside, she still tries to maintain a strong posture. She acts as if nothing is truly affecting her, but internally there is a mix of guilt, regret, and insecurity. And this internal conflict becomes more visible when she is directly confronted with the consequences of her actions. In several moments, we can see her behavior changing. She reacts less with impulsive aggression and more with emotional instability. This doesn't mean she suddenly become a good person. It means she weighed off her past. It means the weight of her past decisions starts affecting how she sees herself. And this isolation marks the point where fight is no longer just against the external world, but against herself. A battle between the version of her that wants to prove worth and the version that begins to acknowledge her mistakes. And that internal conflict creates space for redemption to become possible. After isolation and the of consequences, something begins to shift in Catra's behavior. But this change is not instant of or miraculous. She doesn't wake up one day and decide to become someone completely different or a really better person or anything else. Her transformation happens gradually, forced by circumstances that make her reflect. First comes an internal confrontation. She starts facing the direct results of the choices she made, not just as external events, but as decisions that came from her. And I will talk more about it later, but she starts to in a season 5, she starts to when everything happens in a season 5, after we're gonna talk about it, but she starts to apologize everyone she heard before, like in Catra, when she's trying to remove the chip that her brain puts in her. She apologized in Catra for sending her to this island, for hurting her, for everything she made before. She apologized with Scorpia. She apologized with Adora. She apologizes with everyone she hurt before, and that's a beautiful thing. And that's one of the things I love Catra. I love this kind of characters that are bad in the start, but they start to realize that what they are making, they are doing, it's awful, and they start to realize that and starts to apologize. Like Li Rang and the series. I don't remember the name exactly, but it was something like the tale, the tale of the nine tails, something like that. He is the brother of the protagonist, Liang, and and it's a Korean drama. Is in this series, I like only my favorite character is Lee Rung because he is an antagonist, but he doesn't have a you know strongest. I don't know how to say it, but he don't have a stronger personality. He changes along around throughout the series. I like this kind of character. I refuse myself to have the protagonist as the favorite one, except in some cases, like I like Changwon and my demon, and I like him because he's a devil, but he changes in the series. I like characters that are not defined by their actions. Their personality is complicated. They has a biggest story, that we can analyze this. We can figure out some characters that are so big, their stories, like Double Trouble, like you know this kind of characters, and I like so much to search about it. And if you see in my account on YouTube, all my YouTube is have videos about, especially Catra, but about Shira and the Princesses of Power and Mundo Torajo. It's a Portuguese channel, but whatever. And I like so much to search about things I like, and I have so many tastes. I like so different things, like astrology, science, drawing, studying, books, making. I have so many things that I like to do, to search, to talk about. And I think that the people that doesn't have a specific and one thing they're obsessed are just, they don't have autonomy. They don't have a way to a path different to the others. They're just equal to everyone, and that's, for me, is sad. I'm like Renata Schneider on YouTube. She has so many tastes. She has so many preferences and so many things she like. I'm like her. I like so many things. I love so many things, and that's not a bad thing. So if you like completely different things, don't give up one just to focus on another one. Be whatever you want, whoever you want, and let's get back to the analysis. Alright, sorry, I just needed to say it, and I was packing for another hour, but whatever. For a long time, Catra justified her actions as reactions to Adora, to the Horde, to the system she grew up in. But after the portal and after her capture, those excuses no longer fully hide personal. She begins to realize that the power she chased did not fill the emotional void, and pushing people away to avoid vulnerability or only created deeper loneliness. Another important aspect of this process is how she reacts differently in conflict situations. Before, her automatic responses uh, was aggression, control, or competition. Now we see moments where she hesitates, not completely, but she thinks before act. Moments where she chooses not to react impulsively. These small behavioral shifts show that the transformation isn't happening only in words, it's happening in action. And perhaps the most important turning point in is when her motivation starts to change. Instead of action to prove value or defeat Adora, she begins making decisions based on protection of people around her, protection of what can still be rebuilt. This transition makes her redemption convincing because she doesn't erase who she was, she chooses to act different despite who she was. And that leads to the moment where this internal change becomes a final decisive action. Alright, so here we reach one of the most important moments in Catra's redemption. After all the chaos, isolation, and consequences of her past actions, she finally has the opportunity to do something different. In a confrontation, when Glimmer was in the her prime ship with Catra, sorry, Glimmer directly challenges her emotionally. The situation isn't about fighting off for power anymore. It becomes a deeper question. If this is possibly her last one last chance to choose differently, what will she do? And in that instant, Catra makes a decision that defines her entire arc. She chooses to protect. She chooses to act not to gain an advantage or prove something, but to prevent someone she cares about from suffering further. This act does not erase the past, but it doesn't rewrite the mistakes she made. But it marks a real shift in motivation. For the first time, her action doesn't come from competition with Adora. It doesn't came from the need to prove worth. It comes from a how can I say a conscious attempt to do at least one good thing. This moment is symbolic and it breaks the previous pattern and it breaks my hearts too. You know, but I will say it later. Calm down. The pattern where every decision was driven by pride of or fear. Now there is a choice made with responsibility and empathy. Sorry, and even if she speaks harsh words or hides vulnerability, in that moment the action speaks louder. This scene proves that redemption doesn't happen through apology alone. It happens through behavior. And that act becomes the point where she finally proves, not to the world, but to herself, that she can choose differently. You know, when she says that there is no one in the entire universe who cares about her, it broke my heart. It gave me a wish to say to her, I care about you, Dora care about you, because Catra Dora, right? You know, uh, everyone, almost everyone, cares about her, and it's not because two, three, 10 people don't care about you. That entire world, that entire universe will not care about you, will not love you, will not like you, will not accept you, you know? It's so important and special to me. See how Catra and another characters grew up, along the series. Our baby Glimmer is now a queen, and it's like inside a alien ship in the middle of space. But our little Catra who need Adora to, survive in a horde. Now is almost the queen too, It's growing up and it's thinking more about her decisions, what she do, and Adora is in her process, but it's growing up and everyone is trying to make her realize that she deserves love too, she deserves a carry, she deserves a self-caring, as she is important. So it's not because she is a protagonist, as Catra say before in a before no sorry as Catra says later in the series, in the final of season 5, she says that not always has to be Adora, it can be another person, and Adora doesn't need to sacrifice herself every time just to save people she doesn't even know. She don't need to save the world every time just because she's the chosen one. There's another people who can do this, and like Shadow Reaver sacrifices herself, and I thought that Catra, in the moment later in the series when they have to take Adora to the Horde of Etheria, I thought that when Catra was pushed away by Shadow Reaver, I thought that she would say that she is the who needs to die to save everyone, something like that. And with Shadow Reaver dies, the mother of the both. I treated Adora and Catra as sisters who was losing their mother. The Shadow Reaver was the mother figure in all the series for her, for them. And when they loses her, it just broke our heart. Some scenes still, the most of the series still in my mind, even after it left the Netflix. The leaving of Netflix just broke my heart, because this is one of my favorite series in a cartoon, and this series just mark my mind so much, and it's just so sad of most of the things that happens, like the death of Angela or the death of Shadow. All the mothers are dying. What's going on, but it's too important to me talk about it and show my opinion, and talk about things I like. I wish I could bring reacts, of videos I like here, but I still don't know how to do this. But I will try, And the channel I created thinking about it, and I like so much to teach, to speak, and I think this is the right job for me, But whatever. I just like to talk. So, back to the story. After helping Glimmer escape, consequences come quickly, and they don't come only as military punishment, they come as control. Basically, Horde Prime reacts directly because in the system, failure must be corrected through domination. That's when the control chip is implanted. More than a technological device, the chip represents the attempt to erase identity and replace free will with obedience. And for Catra, this is deeply significant. Throughout her life, she fought for autonomy and control over her position. And now that control is taken for her by force. And the most painful part isn't just physical control, it's the irony. She tried to gain power through the Horde system, and she ends up being controlled by the very system she helped strengthen. This punishment closes a direct cycle of consequences tied to her past decisions inside that regime. In the final stretch of season 5, events unfold in a clear escalation toward resolution. First, Horde Prime consolidates control over Etheria. He strengthens his presence using technology and strategic dominations. Meanwhile, the resistance, led by Adora and the allies, attempt to neutralize this threat. At the same time, Catra is dealing with the consequences of the control chip and her punishment, and she already is shipped when Adora comes back to take her. She is no longer action. Catra, is no longer acting as an antagonist. She is trapped inside a system that now controls her. A thing that she was fighting throughout all the series because she don't like to be controlled. As the final battle approaches, the heart of Etheria becomes the central focus of the conflict. Its powers represents both destruction and liberation. And during this confrontation, Catra and Adora reunite in a decisive moment. And that part of the fight between the shipped Catra and the selfless Adora is just amazing. The promise they made again, and the trilogy that I like so much to talk about, and I forget to talk about it in this video, but whatever. If you want, I can talk about it in another video. As during this confrontation, Catra and Adora reunite in a decisive moment. No longer as enemies, but as people who have gone through massive transformation. And in the middle of the battle against Horde Prime and the activation of the Heart of Etheria, reconciliation happens. And that moment culminates in the kiss, when Adora is just infected by the Horde Prime's virus. Sorry, my English is awful. Catra says that line that I haven't still in my mind till now. That Adora didn't give up. It's not even Catra. I just cried on the scene, and then don't you dare to give up now, and Don't you get it? I love you. I always have, so please, just this once, stay. And then, you love me? You're such an idiot. I have all the scene right there. And you love me? I always have. Righty. And you're such an idiot. I love this phrase, and I love more the hey Dora. And the kiss. I love this kiss. I was just asking, crying for this kiss since season 1. And there's people who ship Glimadora, and I was convincing myself of that, but then again, I see Catradora and I cannot give up of they, and I want to see that, Noel, please, if you're watching this video, make more the series or a movie or whatever, but I need it, and not it's not as isolated romance, but as emotional closure after seasons of conflict. And chronologically, as the season 5 ends with the defeat of Horde Prime, with this incredible Shira. I wrote the first Shira, the first version of Shira, but this one is cool too. And the liberation from control, the stabilization of Etheria, and the solidification of Catra's redemption within the story. So this is, this is incredible and amazing, and is, I love this series. I cannot say anything bad about it because I love it. And when we look at Catra's journey as a whole, it's clear that her arc is not simple. She's not just a villain. She's not just someone who makes bad choices, and she's the direct result of an environment shaped by comparison, abandonment, and manipulation. Throughout the series, her decisions revolve around proving worth, first to Shadow River, then to Adora, and often even to herself, But her redemption does not happen through empty forgiveness. It happens through action, happens and she chooses to act differently despite repeated failure. And this series doesn't build characters as purely good or evil. It builds characters with trauma, motivation, and the possibility of change, and a big story, And Catra represents exactly that. A character who feels deeply, who made serious mistakes, but who slowly rebuilt her identity. And for me, the power of the story is not only the rivalry between her, it's in how the series shows that growth is possible even after destructive choices. And maybe that's the most important message of her journey, that changing doesn't erase the past, but it can transform the future. And Catra is my favorite character because she changes. She has so many designs, and she has so many phases of her story, and that's incredible to analyze. And if you made this far, comment that what you think about Catra's redemption, and whether you consider it one of the best arcs in animation. And if you enjoyed this biggest analysis that I have ever made before, leave a like and subscribe for more content like this on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Send it to a friend that you know that will like this content. See you in the next video. Kisses and bye bye.